The week started with the Gillard government on the ropes, but then Malcolm Turnbull was criticised in an internal email to opposition MPs for missing votes in Parliament. Now, that email from the opposition's chief whip, Warren Entsch, was then leaked to the Sydney Morning Herald, and Turnbull staged a very public tantrum.
Send a letter out like that, it's effectively a press release. I mean, that's the obvious intent of it. Well, it's the natural and ordinary consequence of doing so. Might not have been intended, but that's what happens when you send letters to, half the Parliament.
Joining me now to discuss how the opposition shot itself in the foot is Nikki Savva, former advisor to Liberal Treasurer Peter Costello, and Dr Dennis Glover, former speechwriter to 3 Labor leaders. Nikki, by protesting so publicly as he did, Malcolm Turnbull has managed to turn this into a crisis about Tony Abbott's leadership and that Tony Abbott wants to get him. I mean, who's most to blame here?
Well, I guess the person who's most to blame is Tony Abbott, because he beat Malcolm in the ballot more than a year ago. So that's where it started, and I don't think Turnbull has ever got over it, will never get over it, and is behaving like a bit of a spoilt brat. Dummy spit toys out of the cot, won't toe the line and won't behave as he should.
Dennis, I'm just amazed that Turnbull made such a fuss of this, right? He skipped divisions, votes in Parliament. The opposition has lost what it should have won and denied some of its members the right to speak. He's been warned before, privately. Finally, he and 4 others get warned publicly. He should have taken it on the chin.
Well, he should have. The interesting thing about this is that whips are always getting upset about people missing votes. They're constantly complaining, you didn't turn up here, you didn't turn up there. For something so mundane to become a major issue just shows that there are tensions bubbling away below the surface of the Liberal Party.
In a hung parliament, I don't think that is mundane. I think in a hung parliament, missing a division is a big deal.
It's big. It's irresponsible.
It's a big deal. And not just once, but a number of times. OK, it might not have been 5, maybe it was 3 or maybe it was 2. But a government can fall on the loss of 1 vote.
This was a minor division, though. But I think the much bigger issue about this is it exposes a problem, which is that Malcolm Turnbull is genetically incapable of being number 2 to anybody, and he's not going to give Tony Abbott a free run at the Prime Ministership. And on the other side, Malcolm Turnbull is too left-wing to lead the modern Liberal Party. So there's the conundrum for the Liberal Party.
Spot on. And you know what, Dennis? I thought that Malcolm Turnbull chose to take offence, chose to make this a big issue in order to destabilise Tony Abbott. It was remarkable. There's a big picture that helped give this traction on the front pages of the paper where Malcolm Turnbull goes into the floor of the Parliament, goes up to Warren Entsch in the full view of journalists and photographers, confronts him, jabs a finger in his face. And really, if you have a look at that picture, you'll see it. He was actually told by someone sitting next to them, Malcolm, the cameras are on you, and he does that. That shows me someone's wanting to make a public fuss.
It couldn't have been a more public place. That was the problem. He could have done it in private. He could have taken up his objections with Entsch in private, but he did it on the floor of the Parliament in full view of everybody, including the Labor Party.
And it's just led to cringe-making moments. Have a look at this meeting between where Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull meet together in the floor of just somewhere in Parliament House. It's so awkward. They can barely look at each other. Tony Abbott can barely dare touch him on the shoulder. It's gross. How did these guys work together, or is it not an issue? I mean, Labor had this with Paul Keating and Bob Hawke too, didn't they? Yeah,
they did. I think what it shows is that whilst the Liberal Party is doing well in the polls at the moment, it doesn't have the air about it that it's the coming party of government. It doesn't seem that they're inevitably on the rise, in the same way that you think Tony Blair was in Britain in the mid-90s, or that Kevin Rudd was, from about 2006 onwards.
Speaking of Kevin Rudd, though, Kevin Rudd, I tell you what, Tony Abbott would have been very, very glad that Kevin Rudd interrupted his non-stop travels overseas to drop back in to Australia for a brief visit. And he greeted him, Tony Abbott, like a lost brother at a cancer sort of event, saying, please, thank you for being here. Have a look at this.
The Foreign Minister, Kevin Rudd. Good to have you in the country, Kevin. And of course, I'm sorry. It just, the devil made me say that. I'm sorry about that, Kevin.
Now, why would Tony Abbott be so glad to see Kevin Rudd back in town, do you think, Dennis?
Well, it's probably for the same reason he, you know, Labor likes to see Malcolm Turnbull in Canberra. You know, there's obviously a bit of tension going on there behind the scenes, some bruised egos. I'm not sure that Kevin thinks that he can make it back as Prime Minister, though.
Nikki, have you heard anything more silly in your life? He's a good bloke for Labor, but honestly, Dennis.
Kevin Rudd was born to plot, and I don't think he, like Turnbull, has ever got over losing the leadership. And like Turnbull, he's running out of time. And I think Kevin would know that if Gillard won the next election in her own right, she would sack him. So he has to make a decision about what he does and when he does it. And I don't think, you know, that Kevin will just sit there and let events wash over him. He will be very proactive.
It's a remarkable similarity, isn't it? You've got two blokes desperately unpopular with most of their colleagues, desperate to actually be leader again, and destabilising their own party. Which is doing the most damage, do you think, Dennis?
Well, at the moment, Turnbull. It's all over the front pages again today.
Long term?
Yeah. Long term, I don't think that Kevin Rudd is a long-term threat. I think the circumstances of his loss last year meant that he's not a viable option in the caucus, and whilst he may seem, what he's doing may seem to be troublemaking, you know, that's the nature of the guy, is that he's a workaholic, he's a very activist foreign minister. He's always going to be in the news because that's just the nature of the guy. I just don't think he's plotting away to bring her down.
He is plotting away. He's telling people privately what he thinks of Julia Gillard. You know that's the case. I mean...
But how could he become Prime Minister in this Parliament, given the fact that the independents have their agreement with Julia Gillard? And I think if Labor were to get rid of Gillard now, it wouldn't mean choosing a new Prime Minister, it would mean choosing a new opposition leader.
Look, I don't know this. I think if Labor chose a new Prime Minister, there's no way the independents would demand an early election because they get wiped out, wouldn't they?
I think that's right. And I think the situation with the Labor Party is that while ever the Libs are carrying on as they are, Labor is the ultimate beneficiary. Gillard is the ultimate beneficiary. So her position will strengthen while ever the Libs carry on the way they do. If they manage to get their act together and turn the focus back on Labor, then Labor's problems will resurface.
Rudd, however unpopular he is with his colleagues, he is the people's choice in the polls, and the colleagues must decide whether they want to walk to a defeat with someone they like in Gillard or maybe hope for victory with someone they hate in Rudd.
Which is what they did the first time. They hated Rudd before, even before they put him in.
Look,
and
if Labor were to change its leader again, it would say that the New South Wales disease has taken over Canberra. I mean, I think Labor would be unviable for the Labor Party to change leaders twice so quickly. It would be the end. But psychologically, it would be the end, and the voters would kick them out. They should stick with Julia and wait for the Liberals to implode, as they're doing a pretty good job at the moment.
Dr. Dennis Glover, thank you. Nikki Safford, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Now, coming up, what was the point of Slutwalk yesterday?